Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional, and this week I'm joined by editor Amelia Allwarden, whose work includes Westworld. One of my favorite, though, is Pen 15, and more recently, Sunny for Apple TV Plus. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I think because you worked on Sunny, and I have to ask about the tone because it is a
Yeah.
dark comedy, emphasis on the dark. So I'm wondering like how you tackled this, like how coming into the show, how did you get on board and making sure that you didn't go too dark and lose the audience on this?
Yeah. Well, I think that was one of the things that interested me right from the get-go of reading the scripts, that it was kind of blending a bunch of different tones. And my experience on previous projects has been in all different kind of genres. I've done some comedy, I've done sci-fi, drama, horror. And I think a blend of all these things was really, really interesting to me. So right off the bat, when I was meeting with the showrunner Katie Robbins and the EP director Lucy Cherniak, we were all talking about the tone and how to best, edit it and how to tell that story. And so I think that I kind of used and drew from my experience in all different genres to kind of craft the world in a way of like you can lean more into the comedy in one moment and then right back to the the darkness or the thriller aspect or the mystery and be really sad and kind of like be able to blend those tones kind of seamlessly. That was really important to those guys when coming together and making the show. So it was very kind of like on a scene by scene, case by case basis in terms of how we attacked what the tone should be in that moment.
My friends and I would make little videos in our backyards, imitations of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Eventually that need to tell stories became more of a technical interest and an interest in the art. To me, what's exciting is using cinema in its full potential, which is rhythm and sound design and music. Our job is to set up expectations and then deliver on them. I'm Brian Cates, and this is my course in film editing.
Do you find that there's a difference in editing something that's a dark comedy versus a more traditional comedy? Like I think about the delivery and the actors, it's got to be more um, deadpan almost in dark comedy because you have to play it as if it's real. Like what changes in the editing?
I'm always trying to approach the editing from like the perspective of that character. So in terms of Susie, I think it's like I'm going from her perspective and she's using her dark comedy to help cope with her grief and loneliness. And so really at the end of the day, it's coming from that place inside of her. And so if I'm kind of editing that moment from her perspective, I feel like that's kind of always going to be the best method. And sometimes that it's like more intuition based versus like, well, I always cut fast for a joke
Mhm.
like this, or I always cut slow for a joke like this. It's definitely not that prescriptive. It's very leaning into the emotion of the character and how it probably feels for her in that moment.
Well, and I was thinking about Sunny's character as well, in the weird sense that you're probably going to use Sunny for reaction shots. And I'm wondering how much of Sunny is real versus how much is VFX to get those
Mm.
reaction shots to work.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Sunny was a practical puppet that we used on set. And so her face was also filmed practically. So
Oh,
her digital
interesting.
face was that was being captured live on set by the actress Joanna Sotomora, who plays Sunny. So she wore a piece of headgear that was live translating her facial expressions as she's acting against Rashida so that she can we could see her facial expressions and she could when she smiles, Sunny smiles, and she could control her eyes and her
Mhm.
eyebrows and everything like that. So we would cut to those reaction shots just in the same way we would cut to a live action actor with the reaction shots. The only difference being, of course, if we wanted to manipulate something in post, we could. Or
Mhm.
maybe if the face moves at a certain time, but I want the body to be turned this way, I can kind of take the performance from the first half of her coverage and take her face and move it onto the body movement that I want for the last piece of her coverage. So it made for a lot of flexibility in editing to kind of get exactly the reactions we wanted with Sunny, which is really, really cool.
I have to ask about the flashbacks because one of the things that I found really interesting is, I guess usually you get the flashbacks, but in this, as she's learning things, they start to impact the flashbacks or the memories. So how much of that was in the script, and how much did you guys get to play with in cutting?
Yeah, I love that. So that was, well, the idea was built into the script. Katie wrote that in, which is really cool. It's like
Mhm.
she's kind of thinking back on her memories with Masa, and the new information that she's actually learning is influencing and infiltrating those memories. And that was a really cool way to show kind of like the way you look back on someone and think like, do I really know this person? Was this thing actually a red flag?
Mhm.
What was in his notebook? That's a really cool sequence in episode 2. So we got to kind of start from the jumping off point of knowing from the script level that it's going to be influenced. Her memories are going to be influenced in a certain way, but there were some flexibilities where we like would add more flash frames or add more clues as we were in
Mhm.
post working on, okay, wait, we want to, maybe visualize more of this story. Um, so for example, like in episode 2, she's trying to figure out Masa's Hanko or his stamp, which is used in Japan. His signature, which is the wolf chasing its
Mhm.
tail. And so she sees it. She's like, where do I recognize this? And there's a moment where when she sees Risa's tattoo on her body showing the mark of the dark manual, she sees it, and I added, a flash of his notebook, a flash of just his mouth, and kind of that was just one small example of something where it's like she's getting little bits of memory, and then when we go into the memory, we're adding more like, of course, the scripted moments where Susie turns to him and says, like, what the fuck are you hiding? Because that is, that's a very important moment where she's
Mhm.
sort of like, she's trying to scream to the past, like, you know, what was going on here and why didn't I know about it? And so I think that the ways we could play with that in editing and like heighten it or peel back on it if we wanted to
Mhm.
was really interesting. And we got to play with that in editing. And I loved being able to kind of craft those moments.
I would love to know, in episode 4, there's like a sauna scene or a sequence, and I'm wondering like how you approached editing that because it has some really interesting, as far as I can tell, edits in it, like rate
Yeah.
changes, what have you. Like, what was your approach for that?
Yeah, well, that's like one of my favorite sequences that I put together in the show. And also, it's mostly in Japanese, I think, if not
Hmm.
almost entirely in Japanese, which I don't speak Japanese. And so it was a really cool sequence to put together because, right, you have the main core of the sequence, which is all the Yakuza men speaking Japanese in the tub, about their plans. And Tetsu also is coming in and infiltrating the sauna. And then also we have Susie and Mixie who are trapped actually in the sauna, getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and they have nowhere to go. So you have kind of like those 3 core elements, and I could pick and choose, which times we're going to be with which characters. And I think that was what made it fun, was because it was a flexible sequence.
Hmm.
And then, you know, I tried to basically be like, this is episode 4, right? We've unraveled some mystery. We've learned some things about Masa. We know he's not all he's made out, to seem to Susie their entire life. But up until this moment when Jin actually beats Botan in the bath and beats him against the sauna door, there hasn't been anything like so violent in the series until this point. In the cold open of episode 1, we see some gore, but other than that, it's pretty tame. And so I kind of wanted like the sequence to feel tense and a little bit fun. Like Tetsu's bad guy energy is a little bit fun. And
Hmm.
it's a little bit funny in the sauna that they're getting hotter and they're using a can to cool themselves down. But then like it really gets real when Tetsu begins to beat Botan. And so I wanted it to be, like a shock to the audience. And so that's when we kind of, Lucy, our director, included some in-camera lighting changes for that. But, we also began to do some speed ramps and some more like impressionistic cuts and jump cuts in that sequence to kind of like, I felt like it helped signal like a shift in the show and in Susie of like, something that she's kind of chasing this bit of mystery, but this is actually real and scary and has stakes. And I think that was kind of my intention behind the way that I'm manipulating that sequence.
I would love to know, because years ago I worked on something that was in another language, and one of the things I immediately realized was um, the pacing and everything in the way people speak changes, but also, like it was an indigenous group, and they had no word for goodbye. So whenever someone was leaving, it would be this long sentence saying like, "I will see you another time," blah 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 blah, and then like the subtitle would be goodbye. Right? So I'm wondering like, how did you work with these with the different language, and how did it impact you in terms of timing and pacing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't speak Japanese, but a lot of our show was in Japanese, and we had one of our assistant editors, Charlize Tortani. She's fluent in Japanese, so she translated all of our dialogue for us, which was amazing, and we couldn't have done it without her. So we had all that in script sync, which is how I mainly worked off of it, and she did a transliteration so I could understand phonetically as well, what line I was at. But then what, like you said, there are many different, ways to phrase things in Japanese. And I think like what we tried to do was say what we wanted to say in English to the best of our ability. And then I would basically stagger subtitles. So like all the subtitles that you see are arranged in the exact way that we wanted to do in editing. So we didn't, it's not like done by captioning after the fact because it was so specifically wanting to be told, at least for English audiences. I can't speak to any international, but so I would time out where certain lines in English would end in the subtitle and pause there so that I'm not like revealing the end of a line before they're done with their sentence or before another character understands what they're saying. So I'm trying to keep the audience in the same pace, which is interesting to do with Japanese because some of the syntax is so different. So I kind of tried to take liberties there with basically being within the experience of the character in the scene and best serving that versus like necessarily translating every single word exactly as it's coming up in Japanese and English.
I have a question that is off topic slightly. So AI is like changing a lot of stuff, and one of the things we're seeing now is the ability to do really simple ADR where you can change the words and the mouth matches. But part of that is also dubbing, so like they can change the dubbing so it looks like the person speaking Japanese when they originally spoke English. What is your preference? If you're watching a show, would you prefer to see it dubbed into English with the mouth matched, or would you prefer subtitles?
I absolutely 100% prefer subtitles. I would rather see the actor giving the performance in their native language and hearing their voice speak in the performance that they're intending 1,000 times over. I can't watch anything dubbed. And I think that's actually more related than you might think to Sunny because we do have the translation in-ear translation device, right? And we show that in the pilot. We give an example where you hear it being translated in English, and then we almost immediately do away with it because it was very intentional for us when we were creating the show where we wanted to preserve the performance of the Japanese actors and hear their voice and hear their enunciation and I think if you change their mouth, obviously we weren't doing any of that in Sunny, but if you change someone's mouth, it changes their performance, it changes their face and the emotional experience of it. So we were really intentional about preserving the performance of those real actors and not wanting to hear robot sound, in our ear all the time, even for the sake of it being in English, which is interesting because it's very connective for Susie. She gets to not speak Japanese, but she can interact with people in Japan on a daily basis. Yet, actually, Susie's just hearing the robot voice of somebody. She's not listening to their, voice in real life, which actually creates like a little bit of a barrier as well. So it's an interesting concept to think about.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
Now, I'd love to know, like, you've worked, like, when you were cutting this, there's a lot of like film noir feeling and sort of Japanese films. I'm wondering where you pulled, or what influences you pulled when you were working on this project.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was very much just trying to keep like an indie filmmaking feel to my editing style. Like I just wanted to not be afraid to linger in wide shots or kind of do some unconventional editing if needed. Tokyo Drifter was a influence for sure on like the whole production. Like we have a sequence in the beginning of episode 4 where Masa sings along to, or hums along to, the theme song of Tokyo Drifter, which is of course an homage to what they do in the film.
For a split second, I'm really glad you put the on the end, because for a split second I thought you were talking about Tokyo Drift, the Fast and the Furious movie.
No.
I didn't see it.
Very different films.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. What would you say, the series is still coming out, but is there a particular scene or episode that you're really proud of?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely really proud of episode 4 in particular because I love the whole sauna sequence. I think upcoming episode 8 will be really, really exciting. And I won't say too much about that, but I think like the sauna sequence in episode 4 was something definitely that I was the most proud of.
You've worked on so many genres. Is there an area or a type of film or show that you haven't worked on that you really want to sink your teeth into?
No, because I just did a musical a couple of years ago, so I checked that one off my bucket list. I'm not sure. I've done like it feels like a lot of different genres at this point. I definitely want to cut a feature, because I haven't done that yet. But in terms of genre, I'm pretty happy just kind of continuously bouncing around because I feel very lucky that I've been able to already dive into so many different genres.
Well, it's so hard for so many editors I talk to are like, I cut comedy, I wish I could cut this, or I cut drama, I wish I could, and they get pigeonholed into that one area, and somehow you've not done that. Like, how for them, like, how would you suggest for young people coming up they keep from getting pigeonholed?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of my career, I was really intentional about editing different genre short films, which you would think like won't really matter, but it really does. Like I edited a comedy short film and a sci-fi short film, a horror short film, and like very early in my career. And the comedy short film is what, not what got me Pen 15, but it was a big influence on hiring me when they were looking at my work. And not only that, but when I was an assistant editor, I was lucky to be able to bounce around with a couple different editors that were working different genres. So I had connections in a couple of different spaces. And then I was just really intentional about kind of not taking the same type of job 2 times in a row. And I was lucky to be able to have the opportunity to, of choice and not have to do the same genre twice.
I have one last question for you. Now I've asked you this question before, what's your favorite guilty pleasure film? So I'd love to know, what are you binge watching right now?
Well, I just binge watched all of Shogun, which was completely obsessed with. It's so beautiful, and
Mhm.
also, I really like definitely have a love for Japanese culture after, especially after working on Sunny. But seeing how they did translations in Japanese was really interesting
Mhm.
too, like English to Japanese. And I watched that show. I ate it up completely. I've never been so riveted by like reading all the subtitles, and I thought it was just beautifully put together.
It's interesting that you would say that because there's a similar, like, because when I watch Shogun, there's the scene where he has to meet someone, they sit in the room and they start in Japanese and then slowly just change to him talking in English and they both talk in English. And it's kind of the same when she has the earbud in and it's slowly, we just sort of lose that and go to
Mhm.
English and keep the Japanese language.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of thinking of that when I was watching it. And I think there was a scene in a couple episodes into Shogun where she's translating for him, and then they stop having the translation. Like there's a
Mhm.
scene where then they just cut Mariko out of it, and he's
Yeah.
just speaking to somebody in
Yeah,
English
I
and
think
they're
that's what I'm
responding in
thinking. Yeah.
Japanese. Okay, yeah. And I loved that. I just thought that I was like, okay, that's great because it just slowly phased her out in this way of like, well, that's happening. We don't need to hear the translation every time.
Yeah.
And now they're just speaking. Yeah, I loved that, and I found it like very fascinating the ways in which they did that differently in each scene, and ways in which they used Mariko to translate or to give further context, or the ways in which she wouldn't translate certain things. So it was super fascinating.
I feel like it would also be, I don't want to say risky, but like a delicate dance because if you do it too quickly, people will be like, whoa, what's going on here? And if you do it too slow, people will be like, what is going on here? Because it's going so like the shift is happening. But
Yes, they balanced it perfectly.
well, thank you so much for letting me interview today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Raquel. Thanks for watching.